Shalom. My name is Rabbi Zvi Leshem. I'm speaking to you from Yerushalayim. I'd like to thank Rabbis Price and Grajovsky for inviting me to share some of the Torah of Morein of Rabbeinu Rav Agon Rav David Halivni Zatzal, who I was privileged to be a close student, and I would even say Chassid of for almost 50 years, and it's a great honor to present some of his Torah pertaining to Shabbat Shelach as articulated in the beautiful Sefer Divrei Halev. So Rav Halivni addresses one of the central questions that is bothered all the commentators, which is what exactly is the sin of the Meraglim, of the spies? On the one hand, it seems that Moshe sent them to spy out the land, and they came back and gave their report. So what exactly was so terrible about what they did? They brought back the information that he had requested. So Rav Halivni begins by quoting Rashi on verse 31, where the Meraglim, other than Yoshua and Kalev, of course, said the following words, Chazak hu mimenu. Literally, usually we would translate as, they are stronger than we are, than mimenu. But Rav Halivni quotes Rashi, who brings the Gemara in Sota in 35a, that says, Kivyachol klape mala amru, that the word mimenu can be translated not only as from us, but also from him. And the Gemara says that the Meraglim were seemingly speaking not about our weaknesses, but about Hashem's weakness, that the implication being that even Hashem could not defeat the Canaanites, as the Gemara goes on to say, Kivyachol ein balabait yachol lotziet kelav misham, the Balabayit, the master of the house, can't take his vessels out of there, meaning Hashem won't be able to remove the Canaanites from Eretz Yisrael. In this context, it's interesting to note that the French Jewish great philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, way back, I believe in 1965, described the spy statement as not being only a military assessment, but being essentially a moral claim. And it was basically seen by him as a kind of a post-Zionist, before anyone knew that word, a kind of a post-Zionist, moralistic, false claim that God had no right to remove the indigenous people, the Canaanites, from Eretz Yisrael, and that's what the Meraglim were bothered by, not by the military conquest issue at all, or only, which is an interesting thing. At this point, I'd like to also mention one other commentator that Rav Halivni doesn't bring in, who he certainly could have, which is the Ramban. The Ramban focuses on the word ephes, meaning zero or nothing, in the previous earlier verse of verse 28, which he understands as basically a statement that there's ephes chance, there's zero chance that we're going to be able to conquer the land. There's zero effective opportunities to be able to remove the Canaanites from the land. And the Ramban sees the word ephes as being the key word in what the sin of the Meraglim was. Going back again to Rashi, Rashi sees the key word as being the verse in verse 31, the verse mimenu, stronger than us, or as the Gemara in Sota reads it, stronger than him, than Hashem, Kivyachol. So Rav Halivni, on the one hand, accepts Rashi's basic approach, but he situates the problematic words of the Meraglim a few words earlier. Let me read from Divrei Halev. Rav Halivni says, Rashi focuses on the word mimenu, then us, reading it as then him, i.e., that the people of the land are stronger than God. We would suggest, now this is Rav Halivni giving his own chidush, his own new interpretation, we would suggest that the rebellion against God comes a few words earlier in the phrase lo nuchal, we cannot. Same verse, a few words before. The scouting party, i.e. the Meraglim, was asked to return with facts about the land, the fruit, and the people. They were never asked for their military analysis. Moshe and, until the report of the spies, the people of Israel all assumed that the land could and would be won. It wasn't a question about whether we can do it or not. It was just a question of what's the best way to do it. All Moshe had to do was work out the method for defeating the local warlords. God had promised it, and now the promise would be realized. The Meraglim, in saying we cannot, we're really saying God cannot. So without using the grammatical turn of phrase that the Gemara and Rashi base themselves on, Rav Halivni makes the same conceptual shift and says the Meraglim were saying that we cannot really means Hashem cannot. This was a contagious sin that led to disaster for the entire generation. The spies undermined the confidence of the people by removing the divine from the equation. In other words, the spies overstepped their mandate by giving their own assessment in addition to their objective report. Rav Halivni's Chiddush, in addition to focusing on the word lo nuchal, which the earlier commentators did not, and explaining them as referring to Hashem, is saying that in doing so the spies were, and I quote again, removing the divine from the equation. Thus they disastrously shifted the people from confidence in their ability to conquer the land to complete despair. And Rav Halivni closes his drasha with a message that Jews believe they are part of destiny and history, and as we're part of divine history. The land of Israel is one of those things guaranteed to us by the divine. If we reduce guarantees to natural causes, be they purely political, cultural, or military, we remove divine providence from history and fall into Chet HaMeraglim, into the sin of the spies. As he concludes, let me quote again, there are certain things that are guaranteed to us by the divine, including the land of Israel. When, like the Meraglim, our relationship to those guarantees is reduced to a purely natural, cultural, or military idea, the divine component is eliminated. It is the supernatural aspect of the claim that supplies the confidence needed to bring the promise to fruition and to maintain it. We dare not allow that element to ever be lost again. This is seemingly a surprisingly powerful statement of faith that would seem to imply that one should rely on the divine and divine providence even against historical or natural factors. Seemingly, somchim al hanes, relying on miracles, something the Torah discourages. As we know, Chazal taught us, ein somchin al hanes. And the Ramban, specifically in the context of military issues of conquering the land of Israel, very much stresses that in the context of the need to take a census to know how many soldiers you have, etc. A very simple idea. And yet Rav Halivni seems to tell us here, when we have a divine promise, such as the promise of Eretz Yisrael, it's very, very important to maintain our faith in the divinity of that promise and not to reduce things to mere natural factors, which are much less reliable, of course. Of course, it all may be a question of where you draw the line. Many years ago, Rav Halivni told me that the halacha theoretically permits the returning of parts of the land of Israel for peace, for real peace. And I encourage you in this context to see his letters to Professor Uriel Tal that he wrote after the Six-Day War and after the Yom Kippur War that were recently published by my friend and the Rav's Talmid, Rav Shalom Matan Shalom. Without going into his halachic analysis regarding returning parts of the land of Israel for peace, we can certainly ask regarding his comments here that one has to rely on the divine promise of Eretz Yisrael. Is this a change in his perspective? Later in his life, did he think that we should not be able to return land for peace or not? I don't know, and I won't speculate. I'd like to conclude with a similar idea to that of Rav Halivni from the book Eish Kodesh, or Drashot Mishnot Zam of the Piaseczner Rebbe, the drashot that he gave in the Warsaw Ghetto, and a book, Eish Kodesh, that I discussed with Rav Halivni many years ago. And this is the drashah that he gave on Parshat Shlach in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1940. And the Rebbe asked, why is it that Kalev, in attempting to refute the other spies, does not argue with their claims, as he doesn't argue with them on their military analysis. Rather, he simply states, Yechal nuchalo, we can certainly conquer the land without any proof or without any attempt to show why the other spies were wrong. His response, which was clearly relevant to the Rebbe speaking in the Warsaw Ghetto, was that when one is faced with a situation which looks completely dire, it is better not to try to rationally analyze the methods in which one will succeed or be saved or receive salvation or redemption, that would be, says the Piasetzner Rebbe, like the words of the spy, demoralizing and can even block the chance of salvation and of divine intervention. Rather, in such a situation, one must turn back to pure faith in divine providence. Says the Rebbe, we will go up and conquer it without a rational explanation. This level of faith and trust brings salvation closer. Ultimately, the line between faith and human endeavor is a difficult matter to decide. Nevertheless, regarding Hashem's promise of the land of Israel to the people of Israel, we must never allow ourselves to fall into the chet meraglim, the sin of the spies, by, as Rav Halivni stated, removing the divine from the equation. Shabbat Shalom.